Hey people, it's your host Mojo. Welcome to the Mojo Show. Subscribe, like, and share for the channel to grow. Don't forget to hit the notification button. Let's start the show.
Dream seen as fantasies, don't worry, in your genesis. Ni hard but I'm still making it step by step kwa hii industry. Swali moja ngo tutapenya lini, vitu ziko kwa head bro, wezi amini.
On today's episode, I'll cover a very dark era in Rwanda. The Rwanda genocide. From the beginning to the end, Rwanda was initially occupied by the Twa, the Hutu, then later by the Tutsi. They lived in peace and intermarried, but the Tutsi had ruled before the colonial period. They had a monarchical government, which was led by a king known as Mwami. Now, the colonial partition of Africa happened between 1894 to 1918. Rwanda was allocated to Germany. It was part of the German East Africa, but later, after World War I, Rwanda and Burundi were placed under Belgium administration after the defeat of Germany. The Belgium administration gave out ideas showing names, photos, and ethnic groups of the people, but they favored the Tutsi monarchical rule and made Mwami, the king, more power, but it was still under the Belgium rule. During the 1950s, there was external pressure to decolonize Africa. Back in Rwanda, there was a man known as Gregory Kayibanda. Gregory Kayibanda started a movement known as the Hutu movement, which raised up over the Tutsi dominance and social economic problems. They decided to end the Tutsi rule and said they were invaders who overran Rwanda and enslaved the Hutu community. In 1957, they formed a party known as the Hutu, which its main aim was to overthrow the Tutsi monarchy over those allegations. Now, in 1959, a famous Hutu leader was killed, and it was rumored that it was the Tutsi. This led to war, and many Tutsi died and others fled at the time. And all this is before the genocide. In 1961, September, Hutu succeeded and Gregory Kayibanda became the president. The Tutsi were branded as Inyenzi, meaning cockroaches, and about 130,000 of them fled to the neighboring communities, that is Tanzania, Uganda, and Congo Zaire. The Tutsi who had fled carried out some border attacks, but many were not that successful, except one that they attacked the military camp and seized weapons, but they were seized before they reached the capital, that is Kigali. As a way to show power against the rebels, the president, Gregory Kayibanda, decided to capture 20 Tutsi politicians and executed them, and about 10,000 others were killed, the normal civilians, mostly the Tutsis. And all this, remember, all this is before the actual genocide. In 1965, Rwanda became a one-party state under Gregory Kayibanda, and then he was elected again in 1969. Now, there is tension between the northern part of Rwanda and the southern part of Rwanda. This is because President Gregory Kayibanda was seen as corrupt, he had nepotism, and he had misused power. So, the upper part of Rwanda, there was a leader known as Juvenal Habyarimana regime. He was the general. In 1961, he was the first black officer in the Rwanda National Guard. In 1965, he was the Minister of Defense and the General of Police. And in 1973, he was the General of the Armed Forces. Now, Kayibanda was blamed for putting most of the resources in the southern part of Rwanda and neglecting the northern part. So, Juvenal regime overthrew Gregory Kayabanda, and they put him in prison in 1973, where he starved him to death. The new president made rules that were somehow more authoritative and dictating. Like in the army, the Tutsis could not have any ranks. It was still a Hutu. It's just the tension between the north and the south side. So the Tutsis could not have any ranks in the army or even in public life. It was just bad. And then, unfortunately or fortunately, was elected again in 1983 and again in 1988. Although in 1988 a Catholic newspaper was published addressing corruption, dictatorship, difficulties in ruling, the lavish lifestyle of the elite members, and several journalists were arrested, but this raised awakening in Rwanda as other newspapers started to publish the same. By 1990, the Tutsis number in Uganda, Tanzania, and Congo, Zaire, had reached 500,000, making it one of the largest displaced communities, the refugees communities. And at this time in Uganda, Milton Obote was the president, and many of them faced persecution in Uganda. So what they decided to do is they decided to join Yoweri Museveni's army. At the time, he wanted to overthrow the Ugandan government. This was later successful, as in 1st January 1986, Yoweri Museveni overthrew Milton Obote's government in Uganda, and people like Paul Kagame had gotten recognition and ranks in Yoweri Museveni's army. Now, in 1987, campaigns of the Tutsis to return back to their homeland in Rwanda started in Kampala, and they formed a movement known as the RPF, Rwanda Patriotic Front. The purpose was to overthrow a broke government and bring new political reforms in Rwanda. General Fred was the military leader. Now, some of these refugees had never been at home. They had never been in Rwanda. They just wished to go back to Rwanda, and they just had stories, so they had the ambition. Now, in October 1990, around 4,000 men decided to launch an attack in Rwanda, led by Fred. They used Ugandan military weapons. But unfortunately, on the second day, Fred was murdered. After Fred died, they were demoralized, and this was a major setback in their campaign. But this made France gain interest in Rwanda. So, the France president by then, Francois Mitterrand, decided to offer training, weapons, and French troops to the Rwandan government. In 1990, the Rwandan government had only 9,000 soldiers, but in 1991, they had 28,000 soldiers. So the France played a big role because they facilitated arms contract with Egypt and South Africa and equipping the army. The Rwandan government, with external assistance, they managed to push away the rebels back to their borders. On the national radio, they went a step further, telling the population to trust the rebels. This was bad because this led to hundreds of lives lost, innocent lives mostly, of the Tutsis. And this is actually even before the genocide. So this actually, it's a very darkening history. Now, here's the trigger. In June 1991, the president got pressure from external and internal sources over human rights abuse, corruption, lack of political freedom, misuse of power, and he had to abolish the one-party system. Within months, 16 parties were launched, and some of these made contracts with the RPF under Paul Kagame's leadership. Paul Kagame had turned 5,000 men into a disciplined guerrilla force that made the government shake and tremble sometimes in the future. In 1992, there were peace talks held in Tanzania, but in secret, some people from the northern side of Rwanda decided to launch a movement known as the Hutu Power, with the aim of just holding the power. It incited violence, and a lot of youths were recruited with promises of land, jobs, and other crazy rewards. Principal enemies was the Tutsi. A series of organized killings and tortures were carried out, but the outside world was silent, and they were not alarmed by anything. Like it's just crazy and saddening. But in 1993, Western donors want no more funding will be done unless Juvenal Habyarimana signed a peace treaty with the RPF. Now, in September 1993, United Nations Assisted Missions for Rwanda was launched with an aim of just making peace and keeping peace in Rwanda, but they had limited resources and limited reach. And here's another thing. In the neighboring country, that is Burundi, militia Daye was the first Hutu president to be elected in Burundi. But unfortunately, after some months, that was on 21st October 1993, he was kidnapped by some extremist Tutsi officers, taken to a military camp and killed, and about 150 civilians were killed. That is in Burundi. Back in Rwanda, this fueled aggression and tension became more. They said that the Tutsi did not want to share power. Now, remember there was a peace treaty signed back, and it was only for 22 months, but it's less than 5 months and the peace treaty is already shaken because of the happenings in Burundi. Now, that's how much hatred goes on. A new radio station called the Radio Television of the Thousand Hills, RTLM, was launched. It led insights against the Tutsi and hate speech propaganda. It was just saddening and, if you ask me, primitive. And also a newspaper known as the Kangura was launched also with the same type of information against the Tutsis. It's just bad. Now, from January 1993 to March 1994, about 500,000 machetes were imported. That's 500,000 machetes were imported to Rwanda by a renowned businessman, a wealthy businessman known as Felicia Kabuga and others. This was aimed to eliminate the Tutsis. That's how much the hatred was. This is where things went from bad to worse. On 6th April 1994, the president attended a one-day summit meeting of African leaders in Dar es Salaam, but he decided to travel back the same evening. On board with him was the new president of Burundi and 7 other high government officials on the plane. Now, as the plane approached Kigali and was about to land, it was struck by 2 missiles, and all on board died. This was the actual trigger of the genocide. The identities of the people who struck the plane are still speculations. This was a major trigger. Western governments evacuated their own citizens. Here is actually where it's so saddening that no one was safe. The Prime Minister, Madame Agathe, and 10 Belgian peacekeepers were killed by the Rwandan officers. 100 of prominent Tutsis were also murdered. And this is actually even before the mass murder. Now, the radio television station spread the news that the president was killed. Now, mass murder campaign started, and it's estimated over 200,000 Hutu population had the intention of participation, leading to over 800,000 civilians who were killed. At the time, identity cards were very important since the ethnic group on it determined whether you lived or died. Many people were raped, killed, others burned to death. It's bad. Mass graves were dug up everywhere. The Tutsis were hiding in churches, bushes, schools, their secret spots. The killers were very cruel to a point that if you had money, they will kill you with a gun. They will shoot you. But if you had no money, they would cut your head off. But at the end of the day, if you are Tutsi, you'll die. And if they had gotten you, you'll die. There was no mercy or anything about living. Primarily, more than 2 million people fled and were displaced. This was about a tenth of the population in Rwanda. This lasted for months until on 8th April, where the RPF, led by Paul Kagame, decided to gain control. Paul Kagame called a war, and his troops from the north came to Kigali. And in just a single day, 250,000 of the Hutu population fled to Tanzania because of fear. In just a single day. Is a sad part. The Hutu displacement caused more external attention worldwide than the genocide that was happening for months. Like, it's crazy. The displacement of the Hutu caused much more alarm than the genocide, the killing of more than 800,000 civilians at the time. Now, the RPF gained control of the airport and more than half of the Rwanda. But the French government, led by the then president, was determined to prevent victory of the RPF by any means. According to the Rights Watch, from May to June 1994, armed shipments were delivered in the Congo-Zaire border, and on 14th June, French troops were sent as humanitarian missions. The operation was known as Operation Turquoise. Now, the French troops who reached the ground were so disappointed and felt betrayed and wondered why the genocide was not actually prevented. The RTLM radio station said that the RPF were determined to kill them all, which was saddening. Belgium troops were also sent for peacekeeping, and on 18th July 1994, Paul Kagame declared the civil war over. This is how powerful Paul Kagame was. On the very next day, there was a new government. That was on 19th July 1994. The new government was under Bashar Bizimungu, that was the president. He was a Hutu. And Paul Kagame as the vice, he was a Tutsi. Now, if you look, it was a well-structured government with unity and not ethnically based. According to the World Bank, Rwanda by then was among the poorest countries in the world because of the war that had been going on. Now, this serves as a reminder of how hatred and some lead to ethnic clashing, mismanagement of power, nepotism, greed can lead to. Now, here is the aftermath of the genocide. Local courts were established, and there were 4 major categories of charges. The first one was participating in the genocide and sexual harassment. The second one was participating in the killings. The third one was physical assault. And the fourth one was destroying of properties. The first two were serious charges, and one had to pay for them deeply, but the other two had set penalties and could be reduced if one pleaded guilty. By 2012, around 1.7 million people were convicted, but some decided to forgive and forget because it just reminded them of the dark ages back in the day. Today, the communities live in peace, harmony, they intermarry, they share their wealth equally. They're just happy people. The scars of the dark times are stored as a reminder in the national memorial grounds almost in each province. Now, I don't know if it's true, but the entrance is free. If you wanna go, you can go and look at what happened, but you can also make donations. Now, the first one is the Kigali Genocide Memorial, where over 250,000 people were buried in mass graves. When you go there, you'll see the clothes still in blood stains, the mass graves, the weapons, the victims' photos and their names. It's just a big monument, and it's saddening. And there's another one known as the Nyamata Genocide Memorial, which was originally a Catholic church where the Tutsis went to seek refuge during the genocide. Now, many people were killed trying to, seek refuge in the church. The memorial ground has scars like the bullet-ridden walls, the broken doors, blood-stained clothes, and it has over 45,000 victim remains. It has a lot of skulls and bones displayed there. It's a symbol of remembrance. It's just very bad. All of this is kept up to date as a sign of remembrance of the Dark Ages. Others are the Tarama Genocide Memorial and Bisesero Genocide Memorial. Don't forget to hit the notification button, also subscribe, like for us to grow the channel for more and more content. Now, is gonna say before I finish, peace is life, unity is strength, and morality is the way. Let me repeat that, like, peace is life, unity is strength, and morality is the way. Now, this is how small vices like hatred based on ethnic groups can lead to mass destruction. So, be happy, stay smart, and be you. Until the next episode, it's your host, Mojo.
Don't worry, in your genesis ni hard but I'm still making it step by step kwa hii industry. Swali moja ngod tutapenya